Hi, I'm Kim Snyder, film director, and so excited to be here with Violet to talk about your film.
Thank you
Um,
so much for Kim for doing this. It's
Thank
such an
you, thank
honor.
you. Well, likewise, it's a beautiful, beautiful film, like a poem. It is a poem, and just so interested in learning a little bit more, and telling you some of my questions, some of my reactions to it.
Yeah,
Um,
please.
yeah, so let's see. I guess I'm most curious to know, to ask you questions about um, how the the attachment to tradition and what I sense was sort of a reclaiming of tradition juxtaposed against the struggle for equality as women and gender parity, if you will. Do you see those things right now in the larger context of China? Um, that struggle is that
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think that to make a film about gender issues in China, you really have to look at the landscape of the history, and also you really have to look at traditions too, because otherwise, if you separate those from contemporary, I think that's not fair to look at where we are right now. And the traditions play a really big part of shaping of who we are now, and I think that even for me it's really hard to completely get rid of it, because if I totally toss it out, I don't know who I am, as a woman, especially from China. So that was also like really important for me when I developed this project, knowing that there need to be a place to have the context of history and tradition to be played out in a way that it's respectful to that, but not completely separated that from what's going on today. And um yeah, because I think that defines part of our DNAs, and that's how we're brought up, no matter whether it's good or bad. There's a lot of things about women's virtual that's in our traditions and cultural that when you look at it today, they may not necessarily be good, like traits and everything, but that's how, defines thousands of years of who we are. So, I mean, that's a constant thing of how I'm also struggling as myself making this film, of how much I should unroot my own narrative, connected to that, and how much I should embrace that. So it's a struggle. It's a struggle, and I think it's not just a struggle for me; it's a struggle for every woman. And I wanted to find a way to show that in the film.
Yeah, it's really I mean, not only is it beautifully shot, but especially the intergenerational aspect. So when I see the depiction of the intergenerational relationships between people of your generation and the elders, I see even within that piece, within the say tradition part of it, um a strong sense of empowerment. I guess I'm thinking it's easy for people to make it black and white, like
Yep.
the elder women are wed to tradition, which is wed to a lesser role in society of women. But it seems like it's a way more complicated than that.
It's
Uh,
actually the opposite to me, like, and it's sometimes, like not completely to me, that there's element that it's actually the opposite. For her coming out from that generation, you would think that she would be the one who's carrying down the concept of traditions, passing down that part to women today. But actually, because of the existence of Nushu, it gave them a different kind of entry point into a different narrative, and allows to actually free her in her own being, despite of the physical and then the surrounding kind of suppression that she actually was facing in her generation was much more than us. But it actually allowed to free her to be who she actually want to be. So like the first time I saw her, He Yanxing, the last living master who's in the film, I was completely shocked how fierce useless, she is as a woman. So it's actually the contrary of what she's passing down to Hu Xin, which I find it so fascinating, because I'm also like that of, feeling that, whatever, my mom's generation, my grandma's generation, it's all about woman, is about the definition of sacrifice, like the more we sacrifice, the better as a woman we are. But she's completely the other side. But at the same time, she's still pushing Hu Xin to find a boyfriend. So there is a lot of these nuance and complexity in it. I find it really, really fascinating. And it triggers me to look back into, my grandma's generation or my mom's generation, and the things that, the context that they're sitting in, and actually the courage that it took them to become who they are. So it actually helped me to look at my past generation in a different way because of her.
Yeah, I totally got that. And this sort of empowerment that comes from reclaiming something that is older and traditional. Does that have is that a political statement in and of itself in today's China, to reclaim something that is so wed in
I
yeah,
think I think in the larger picture, in where China is now, that has been kind of the trend of reclaiming the tradition, reclaiming the culture in a lot of ways, as part of the bigger agenda of how to revive China and the Chinese culture in certain ways. But I think in my film, what I'm trying to say is not just that. I find it that it's so easy to see it as the culture as a way of, it's just like what the Confucianism is, what those traditional culture is, but actually part of those cultural are things that's actually missing for us to know what they actually existed too, like Nushu. That's a culture that should be part of a narrative as a woman in China growing up, but 99% of us don't even know. And I felt like reclaiming and reviving cultural that belong to us, that we're not even aware of, that this is actually also part of our DNA, is another sense of reclaiming the kind of power that we actually had, and just we didn't know that. And I think that it's a very beautiful thing of what those women created in Yushu, that can still have such an implication on our generation and the younger generation, and that's our tradition too.
So as a younger Chinese woman, I mean, I'm curious about how, the feminism is sorry, let's turn that off. Feminism is one of those terms that's so broad and loosely defined, but the brand of feminism, as it were, in the US, how do you perceive that, and how is this being seen by sort of feminist circles here?
I think I almost, like, when I'm trying to make a film about women's rights in China, I almost wanted to completely take away the concept of what feminism is defined, because feminism is defined completely in something different in China. It's actually, it's still not a good word in our society. So like for people from like Eastern culture and understanding feminism is sort of like even a threat to the societies that we're living in, especially in the the male dominant powerful kind of like situation that they see feminism is more of a threat of like taking over what the existing stable structure is. But to me, I feel feminism is just how a way of we look at in the how do I say, in the way to for us to reflect on what is injustice for women, that that's kind of building in our role, the expectation on us in a society like this. And so to me, it is a tool for us to kind of reflect on how much we should look inside, instead of like changing the society, taking down whatever is existing right now that's wrong, which is important. But also I think is a tool for us to look inside about what are the things are actually being done gender wisely as injustice to us as women. And I felt so strongly, especially when I became a mother, when I went back to China, and that was so predominantly kind of like overwhelming in a way that I felt betrayed, and I felt injustice in a way that after I became a mother, the kind of societal expectations for women to deliver, to be a mother, and also to contribute to the family, the concept of sacrifice is so confining, and to me. And then that's what I think is when I start to look at, actually, I need this feminism power and tool to reflect all of these things. So that's what fascinated me of Nushu, is this becomes their way to negotiate with themselves and in a collective. And at the end of the day, they use that to negotiate with the dominant powers. And I find it so powerful because it started from each one of them themselves, to be able to share their sufferings, to be able to be vulnerable, and then to be able to reclaim their power and their pride as women themselves. And I think that the starting point of that is very much, I felt like is needed now for every woman to look inside and to look inward. Yeah.
It's interesting because, the notion of Nushu in terms of just more of a, both an individual, solitary inward kind of a thing, as well as it playing a role of collective.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting to me too. I hadn't really thought about, that progression or that in the film.
Yeah, because I think that it gives a space for us to look inside, to be our most honest self, and then to say that these are our sufferings and this is not right, and then to come together and to share that and build power from within. And I just thought it was so like unbelievable how they created that kind of whole concept, and also the very intentional structure of sisterhood that they built. Yeah, it's just like, to me, it's really, really powerful.
Yeah, so it really feels like it's built on a foundation of something that you have to find it in yourself first, or else it's sort of hollow. And I guess some people might say there's, a certain brand of, say, feminism here that is only based on collective and action. But, without that kind of that quiet art, that quiet thinking to have it really embody it. It's kind of like social media. You can just like something, but to actually embody it and be a real activist or a real feminist.
Yeah, and I think along the way, I didn't even realize I become a radical feminist, as I was perceived by other feminists here, and I'm like, yeah, that's actually really interesting. And because I don't believe in, like, as a Chinese, I think that, growing up in a system like that, it's really hard to imagine to rebuild a system. But for me, I think to be able to reflect on that and then to find a way to connect to people in a more gentle way. And so hopefully that we can, like, all look inside to reflect on what is actually who we really want to be in the most honest way. And even to connect to men, just to help them to see from our perspective in a more nuanced way. So hopefully it can successfully reach them and help people to really see where our gap is in terms of a gender understanding. And I think, like, maybe I am radical, but like, I wanted to kind of nudge in this subtle but also loving way for people to kind of see, and to bridge the gap of understanding, if that makes sense.
And that quiet way, which is so nicely done through, art, film, poetry. Tell me how that translated into your choices with camera. And I loved the score. I loved the music. So how did you think about that when you were marrying the craft to this
Um,
idea of a quiet
yeah,
temple?
I think that's I've been asked many times about this, but I actually was thinking that I never thought about it because I think that's who I am as a person. And also that's who I feel drawn to as collaborators who work with me, because that's, the same kind of person that I feel the presence of their power as well as artists. So that reflects to my composer Chad Cannon and Leona Lewis, and that reflects to my editor John Fabrother. And then, just looking back, yes, there's also that kind of people. Like we believe in that kind of um quiet reflectionness, and I think that's also like shows where I am as a filmmaker. So yeah, I think like it kind of come quite organically, and even my cinematographer is that kind of people. And I think that's why that it also kind of is a true representation of what Yushu is, because they're writing in these letters, and they're saying in quietness among themselves and in poems, and so I felt like it's very authentically kind of connects to what Yushu is about, but it's also reflects the kind of collaboration that I'm drawn with, the people that I like to work with. I guess that's probably more honest answer of why the film came out this way.
Mm. And were there any, what would you say, what were some of the surprises, or what surprised you the most in making this film, if there were surprises?
I felt like I don't know if that's a surprise, but I am surprised of what I have become, as because I mean the film is my journey, also reflect my own struggle and everything. And I never really thought that I will have a clear answer after making this film about how to be a mother, how to be, a wife, or how to be a good woman, or whatever, all those things that's I was struggling with when I started with the film. But I do feel like I'm surprised of where I am now after making this film. The confidence that these women gave me, from these poems, and then the strength that they gave me, and the people that I met through the film who give me so much wisdom and love and understanding also was where I am. And I felt like, as I said many times, that I still have doubts, but I've known how to kind of leash these doubts in a way that's more constructive and positive. And I felt like I've become more fearless in a lot of ways, of taking risk in filmmaking, also in my life. So I mean that's something that I was really surprised to see where I am now. Um,
And how
yeah.
do you imagine that will influence your next work, or if it's underway? I don't, um, as an artist, as a filmmaker.
Yeah, because when I started this project, I was pushed by Jean Chen, who is my producer and my longest mentor for a long time, to direct. But I subconsciously always thought that it may not be my place. Because like in China, the established filmmakers are men, and I also felt like I'm not creative enough, I'm not artistic enough. And I just, like after, like many years producing and then taking the courage of making this film, I firmly believe it's just because I was fighting all these excuses myself, and really that now I really enjoy of taking risk. Like through this film I've taken so many risks. Like what excites me is that the film gave me a lot of possibilities to even think about how to construct the backstories. We were even experimenting on animation for quite a while. In the end, didn't get into the film, but I was I thought that that's an area that I knew nothing about, but I had such joy, experimenting those and just taking risk. And I just thought that, okay, so now what anchors me more is that what are the areas that I haven't taken risk at, in terms of stories that I wanted to tell, or, like possibilities of, like styles that I haven't experimented. So I felt like I'm more drawn to those things instead of like what defined me in the past of how I want to make film. So it actually is quite exciting. So I'm thinking of making a series now because the concept that I'm having will allow me to kind of experiment on many different ways of this series, and I feel quite excited about. So as soon as I finish this journey of the film, then I can get onto that. Yeah, it will
Can
be.
you say if is it thematically related as well?
Yeah. So I'm developing a series about dating coaches. So and how economy and politics and cultural affects each country in terms of the dating dynamics, and how especially post pandemic, and how that has defined the younger generation, because I feel like dating is fundamentally the question one asks themselves, and that relates to who they are, who they want to become, and what kind of life they want to have. So for the countries that we have developed, there's a lot of possibilities of like styles, and also the stories itself, the richness of the story. And also I think that I find my voice also embedded in kind of the nuance and layered way of the backdrop of the context in each different kind of settings, and how that connect to the main stories and the forefront stories. So I'm very excited about that.
That's great. That sounds so interesting.
Thank you.
Interesting. Do you have any questions for me in terms of as a viewer, a fellow filmmaker?
Yeah, do you feel on what kind of level, I think as a female filmmaker who have been, making films for many years and directing film for many years, do you feel, I mean, this story kind of connect you to a way that of your generation of like, like female filmmakers struggle also, and I think that people has been saying that this film has if this film is very female gazed, but do you feel like it's relatable, that it could be relatable to also like men as well, and like especially men in here in society, like here?
Yeah, I kept thinking about taking out, the component of the cultural component, the difference between culture, but also taking the gender piece out, just in terms of tradition and modern struggles. But I felt myself thinking a lot about sisterhood and the importance of women. As you were talking, I love Jean Shen. So I was thinking about all these amazing women I know, more of my generation. I think she and I actually are born on the same day. So we have like a funny little connection that way. It's in terms of our craft, when I was younger, I never really thought a lot about, well, I'm a woman versus a man trying to make films. As I get older, it's become actually much more
Interesting.
apparent, the hardship and the inequity that has been there. But how important mentors and this idea of people passing down, and yet it's such a tough business that we often don't have time to even do this. But it's so nurturing. I mean, I'm just sort of riffing here, but it does, when I was asking you about how it's affected you, and you talked about both motherhood and as an artist, I think a lot about my creations as children. you nurture them, you birth them into the world. And I think I really took in that you were saying is, if I understood it, that you were saying in a way that the empowerment and this notion of feminism is also about choosing not to see a martyred kind of sacrifice,
Absolutely.
but there's an empowerment. And the same thing with making films. There's an enormous sacrifice, and you are a slave to your film like you are to a baby. I mean, you can't leave it.
Wow, yeah.
You
You're
know?
absolutely right.
So there's a parallel to me about creation, about community, and how we find community, how we nurture it. And in terms of how that all fits in with gender equality and our sort of interrelation. I mean, we've been living through such a complicated time here in the US after, the whole Me Too movement. It's complicated because there are a lot of generational experientially different experiences. So yeah, the film made me think a lot about, it's always wonderful when you see that contextualized in another culture, from another cultural perspective. It's always a lens or a way to think about your own journey in your own country and your own culture. But I am curious to see how men to learn how. I would love to have a conversation with whether it be an American man or a Chinese man about this. And, I'm steeped in a lot of conversations now with Gen Zers from the work that I've done. And so I'm constantly having conversations with the friends from my past film about gender fluidity and all kinds of just busting open all concepts of, so that's interesting too, because I've been speaking a lot about just binary constructs
Right.
of gender and to them, and how that fits into all this. I don't know, but there's it's just complex.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we should probably have coffee and find another conversation to dig deeper
Absolutely.
into this. But thank you so much for spending the time with me to talk about the film. And I'm
It's
really
a
honored
beautiful
that.
film.
Thank you.
Congratulations. I just found myself feeling really meditative and very absorbed in the characters and in the beauty of it. So thank you.
Thank you.